Not just financially. This brings me to the question that I had to bring up. Doing the research for yourself, you just said tax the rich, I believe. But I thought you were far right and believed in deregulation and the billionaires. At least that's what the media tells everybody, right? You've come out multiple times saying these people are getting away with not paying anything. You're getting ripped off. So
the Wall Street Journal dumped out in the summer of 2017. I wanted to raise, to President Trump, I said we should raise tax on the wealthy to 44%. And on the corporations, as they bring this cash back from overseas, right, it ought to be taxed less if it's put in capital equipment and plant, and because we must rebuild the manufacturing base of this country for the American people. And if you put it in Detroit or St. Louis or Baltimore inner cities, you get a bigger tax cut. Every piece of capital in this country that goes into the manufacturing, put into capital equipment to build fourth industrial manufacturing jobs is going to increase the ability of the working class family. Look, here's the goal. We want the ability, and I'm not saying women have to do this, but we want the ability to get back to the 50s where one wage earner can have a family, a wife and children, or a husband and children, and they don't have to work unless they want to work. We can get back to that. It's no law of there's no second law of thermodynamics that says we have to have this free trade, that we send our factories all over the world, that we basically put all the burden on the American, the little guy, the American citizen. For all the wars, all the taxes, everything's put on his shoulders, his or her shoulders. It doesn't have to be that. You should have a special deal if you're an American citizen, right? And that deal deals with, let's have a tax policy that rewards labor and work, not just simply capital, because right now it's out of balance. Let's get back to a balance. I'm a capitalist. I'm not some left-wing socialist, but I got to tell you, and I say this all the time, unless we reform capitalism, this thing's going away, and it's going away fast.
Interesting. If the money you held got higher tax rates, but the money you make has a lower tax rate until you hold it for like a set amount of time, and then the tax rate starts to go up the longer you hold it.
Well, it sounds like negative interest rates. Right?
Circulation.
But here's the thing: is that the wealthy, they have this is if you go back and look at the 24 people that are the wealthiest in the nation. They don't pay the tax of Bloomberg and Buffett is like 0.11 because they have all these tax accountants looking for every deal in the world that the system gives them, supposedly for investment, but system gives them to avoid taxes.
I will counter with this though. Taxing them just puts the money into the government, and it's like the government is free from corruption.
Well, first off, it doesn't totally put the money. First off, we got to pay. If we're going to have a government that provides these services and has a $1 trillion, and that's what we have, a $1 trillion defense budget, because you add up all the intelligence and add in all the areas where they put it out into other departments, it's $1 trillion a year. If we're going to continue to spend like this, somehow it's got to be paid for. I'm all for cutting it, but still the wealthy, because of their benefits. Remember, think about it. It's like the environment back in the 60s or 70s before we had environmental laws. They had this thing called the commons. Right, because the effluent, the Hudson River, was filthy. The air in L.A. you couldn't see through because to dump everything didn't have any charge to it. And then the people had a thing to actually start to charge for effluents. You had the Clean Air Act and all these things, and it got. And those people say, the libertarians say you can't regulate, but the water got cleaner, the air got cleaner. President Trump says, I love clean water, I love clean air. Hey, it all got better. Why? Because the commons. We have the same thing here when people say, well, Steve, we have the most robust liquid capital markets in the world in the stock market. That's all because of the little guy. It's because it's civic society. Upon the shoulders of the working class and middle class in this country, everything rests. Okay? The cops, the teachers, the nurses, the people that build the coach Little League, that build the churches, that civic society of America is what provides for the safety of investment. That's why the whole world wants to come here and invest their dollars. It's on the shoulders. And all my point is, hey, let's give a little something for the effort, right? I'm not some radical socialist, but if we don't shift a little more to the working men and women in this country, right? And that's what the apes are doing. They ain't waiting for regulation. You know what they're doing? They're saying, hey, you're destroying good American companies. It's a rigged game. How about this? Buy and hold, right? And if you're sold this stock short and it goes up, that's tough luck. We're going to crush you, and they're going to crush these hedge funds on the way to the corruption. They're going to get to the casino, and they're going to tear the casino down.
This is Occupy Wall Street 2.0. It's got a lot of people on the left, younger people, Democratic socialists cheering for it. It's got people on the right, Trump supporters, populist right-wing individuals, all cheering for it.
Lots of veterans.
A lot of veterans. It's amazing to hear, the things you're saying about the working class, about taxing the rich, because I wonder why it is that we don't see more of the populist left agreeing, finding out where they agree and what they can target to change, and changing it.
I think the populists. I've always said a third of the Bernie. Let's go back to 16, and my work on populism with Breitbart beforehand. 16 was very simple. The reason Trump won is that the American working men and women and certain middle class people rejected the managed decline of our country by an elite of both parties. It's Wall Street, it's the global corporations, it's the uniparty. And here's what the thing is. They're comfortable with that managed decline because they're making more money on the way down than we made on the way up. Okay? So it's the managed decline of our country by the elites. And that's what kind of the Trump was, the middle finger to that.
Yeah, it's like
right? And that I think more populist, the 1/3 of the Bernie people, particularly now after 2 cycles, you didn't win. Right? Because the fight was not there. The fight of the people was there, but the fight of the candidates itself was not there to take on the neoliberal neocons of which the Clinton apparatus was and the central apparatus of the Republican Party.
But one of the problems I see now, I mentioned this earlier on in the show, friends of mine from Occupy Wall Street now supporting the federal government, the FBI, the establishment, they've abandoned the populist left, and it's just basically tribalism. If it's bad for the right, they'll cheer for it. They're not interested in improving things. I wonder if a big aspect of it is they're young and inexperienced and their whole world is just my side is the right side and we better win by any means necessary. Or if it's just authoritarians who have manipulated people, seized power. And while there certainly were populists at Occupy Wall Street, many of which I found out later switched and voted for Trump. You got Jack Murphy's book, Democrat to Deplorable. A lot of these younger people who are in their early 20s just support the establishment and will vote for whatever the establishment wants.
I'm thinking about the liberal economic order. They built it after World War II to prevent World War III. The British and the Americans were like, we're going to set up military bases all over the world. And they basically did prevent World War III. Although you could say now maybe the system's vestigial and it's ready to be changed or ripped down, or maybe the whole world could create a world police or something. But people see the value of this fascistic militarism that's prevented World War III. And so there is a kind of a dissonance, like, how do we transition away from this?
Let me go back there for a second. I actually think we had World War III, and we won by information and economic warfare, and we didn't have to go. We had to go kinetic sometimes within Korea or these in Vietnam and other places, but we won because we took down the central communist apparatus of the Soviet Union. Right, we defeated it. And remember, in 1989, within a few months of the Berlin Wall coming down, you had Tiananmen Square. In Tiananmen Square, we had a moment in time when the elites in the United States, having Reagan's we win, they lose, having the collapse of the Soviet Union, we could have taken down the whole thing. The CCP would have collapsed. That's why they were in panic. In 30 days after we propped them up, General Scowcroft went over from Bush 43 or Bush 41, went over there and basically made a deal with the CCP that we're going to support you. We're going to because they saw the ability of the Chinese model. Right, they always thought they could change China Democrats, but they really bought into the economic model where China would be the central apparatus of manufacturing. Those jobs would all get shipped over, and you essentially use, they say, cheap labor, slave labor in China. Lao Beijing, old 100 names, would be slave labor, and that would support this international system. That's not a conspiracy. Them's facts, okay? And this whole system is predicated upon that. We actually won World War III by information and kinetic warfare, and we gave it away. And that's why all the guys who said the end of history and all this nonsense forgot the fact that we then went to this kind of globalization, right, predicated around the slave labor of China that exported deflation and inability to raise prices, but particularly inability to raise wages, because you've always got excess capacity by the state-owned industries of China, and that's why working people throughout the world have suffered. In the United States, the central economic point, we haven't had an increase. Real wages have not changed, except for 19 when Trump had it, since 1972 or 73. Look around anywhere in this country. It's clearly not as good as it was back 30 and 40 years ago, because you've had a huge deterioration of working class people ability to have high value added, high paying manufacturing jobs.
During Trump's administration in 2019 particularly, the economy was great. Jim Cramer said the best numbers of our lives. There was something I found pretty hilarious. The left has advocated for a bunch of things like a 4-day work week, or less hours per day, or more vacation time, paternal leave, maternal or otherwise. And they want this through regulation. The government should snap their fingers, write it down, boom, make it happen. Under Trump, without regulation, it started to happen. there were several stories. I think it was Potbelly Sandwiches announced a 4-day work week, vacation time. We started seeing that happen in so many different companies. People were making more money. When we were buying furniture for the first studio setup for this show, I went to a furniture store and the lady told me she had never made as much money in her life as she did in 2019. This was the beginning of 2020. And I heard the same thing from the contractor who was doing work on the house to help us build this. He's like, this best year of my life last year. So all of these things came about through economic policy under Trump. But I'm wondering, some people have argued it was Trump just spending like crazy, which was creating an artificial bump in the system that made everyone feel good, but wasn't actually fixing things. Curious what your thoughts were with.
Look, there's a Keynesian aspect to that. You know, you had spending and you had tax cuts at the same time, so double whammy. But you also had restrictions on immigration, right, which is a big thing for working class people, particularly non-skilled labor. Remember, it's the Chamber of Commerce, and it's the Republicans that want all that. The Democrats want the votes, and the Republicans want the cheap labor, okay? But also at the higher end, I'm a restrictionist. And I also am the leader of one of the leaders of the freedom movement of the Chinese people, and I'm the chairman of the Republican Hindu coalition, right? So I love Modi. I love the nationalism in India. I got a lot of close friends, but I cherish it. But I'm a restrictionist, and the reason is we need American citizens to get high-tech, if you turn the entire education system over to STEM in grade school, right? You need to be able to have African-American and Latino and Hispanic people get into the engineering schools and get jobs in Silicon Valley and get jobs in the fourth industrial revolution, manufacturing jobs. This whole thing, we're going to be a service economy, is a joke. One of the biggest things coming out of here now, you see, is 9 million jobs, and they can't fill them from the service economy. 1/3 of the jobs for the Biden thing, the disastrous job numbers, were bartenders and waiters. I used to be a bartender in college. But people don't see it as a career. One of the good things, you see people hesitant to come back. One of the reasons is, hey, I don't know if I just want to go back to that grind that has no future to it. Can't I do something else? That hopefully is the entrepreneur spirit. People want to start businesses. But it's also, we must return to become a manufacturing superpower. Anybody that sells you, any corporation, any advertisement, any politician that sells you that we can be a service economy is lying to you, You're always going to work for serf-like wages, right? You're always going to work like serf-like wages until we return to a manufacturing superpower. I'm a hardcore protectionist. I'm hardcore tariffs and protectionist. And not just that, I wouldn't happy talk around these corporations about, you're going to take your capital and you're going to move it overseas. No, you're not. Until we understand that manufacturing jobs are not being outsourced, that capital and investors' capital, that belongs here in the United States of America. It's protected, and the civic society has built it. We're not communists. We're not socialists. But this ability, and this is my problem with the libertarians, they see the free flow of capital and the free flow of labor and open borders and open capital markets. I say, not so fast. We're a country with an economy. We're not an economy first. This whole thing of this Austrian School of Economics and all these guys talking about, it's like a lot of guys on the right now saying, it's just free markets that Blackstone and BlackRock are buying up all the housing stock. No, it's not. We can't have a system where you buy up all the housing stock and have the millennials just rent it back, so you're paying your interest payment and you get the zero interest rate, you get the juice on the asset increase. You can't have a country like that. You're not going to have firemen. You're not going to have police officers. You're not going to have military to protect you. You can't do this. If people don't get skin in the game, and I mean real ownership, so they can sit there and go, this is mine, I can pass it on to my kids, you're going to have a system that's going to collapse.
You should have been on day one in New York at Occupy Wall Street. See, what happened was, in the early few days, a lot of what you're saying was what was being said. I met an elderly couple, they must have been in their 60s, with a big old American flag, talking about how we got screwed over by the elites, how the big banks were ripping us off, how we were footing the bill. And there were a lot of people there. But there was no sustained leadership. What happened was, these kind of people are old, they have work to do, so they eventually go home. But the trust fund college kids with nothing but time on their hands and driven by woke ideology, they would come down and they would organize the meetings every single day. And over time, this weeded out a lot of the conversations, a lot of things that you were saying. I feel like, and maybe it's just wishful thinking, that if you or someone like you were there on day one, someone who was going to actually say the things you're saying and maintain that as the conversation, then the woke takeover of Occupy never would have happened. And that would have very much changed the trajectory of the past 10 years. When I was at Occupy, in the first week, I met Luke Rudkowski. Do you know Luke? He's was it Luke an anarchist?
Yeah, technically.
Anarcho-capitalist.
You love him.
He's a right anarchist.
This is his company. We Are Change.
Yeah, We Are Change. We have him on the show every so often. He's up at Porkfest, the Free State Project in
sure.
Hampshire. I met him down there, and he's right libertarian, and I was left libertarian, but it was very much like the elites are screwing us, the system, and all that stuff. I remember I was having a conversation with some people one day, and they announced they were implementing progressive stack. That meant if you want to speak at any of these meetings and you were white, you're out. You're a man, you're out. If you were LGBTQ, you'd have to announce that to the entire group and out yourself if you would like to speak, if you were a man. That shut everything down. People started leaving. People who were interested in pushing back against the corruption started crying. I knew one guy who was saying a lot of things you were saying. He left crying and never came back. Then you look at where that movement has gone since then. And, look, I supported Bernie Sanders in 2015 and 16. Why? What did Bernie Sanders say to Vox.com in the interview with Ezra Klein? I am not for open borders. That is a Koch brothers proposal. They want free labor, and I don't support that. What did Bernie Sanders then say when he was in the debate stage in 2019, 2020? How many of you are in favor of decriminalizing border crossings? They all raise their hand. How many of you want free healthcare for nonsense? They all raise their hand. That's not what the left was about. Remember the battle in Seattle? 1999, was it? I was a little kid. I remember it. I learned about it only through Occupy Wall Street. They were opposing the World Trade Organization. Something happened.
WTO.
Yeah, these people came in during Occupy, and because they were young, exuberant, and had nothing better to do, easily took it over. And it's a bummer because there were a lot of people. I see a lot of people from Occupy who went to become Trump supporters, Trump voters. A lot of people sort of supported Bernie, then went to support Trump. And a lot of those people are still in the same place as not necessarily left, not really right, but just for the people, populist, support manufacturing, support the working class. And we're being torn apart by a culture war. We're being torn apart by ideology, this whole thing about critical race theory. And because of that, it's fascinating. I'll see people on the left who completely agree with everything you said about increasing taxes on the wealthy and helping the working class, but then they'll come out and defend critical race theory, something that we, for instance, absolutely oppose. I oppose because I come from I'm second generation mixed race in my family, and that ideology, identitarianism, would rip apart, the way our family, the way we live. So I absolutely have to oppose that. I feel like that whole battle has made it impossible for the left and right to come together, maybe on purpose. It started around Occupy Wall Street. It split everybody up. And now when you see left and right populists agreeing on core economic issues, they can't agree on these critical race theory questions. They're not going to come together. You know what I mean?
I think enough can agree on the basic economics that we can transcend this and actually can take. I think you're going to see a realignment. The key is look at the Rio Grande Valley. Look at these. Look at adult. These are hard. That's the most hard scrabble part of this country. It is 85% Hispanic, working class Hispanic, very culturally conservative. But more importantly, they understand that open borders is crushing them. These are people that understand I'm an American citizen. I deserve a deal that protects me and gives me a shot at a good paying job eventually if I work hard. I mean, let's go to Mr. Floyd and I say this all the time about George Floyd, and I don't want to talk about the crime that was committed against him. That's a different topic. But I want to say, let's look at his life, right? When he died, he had CCP virus, he had COVID-19, he was on fentanyl and opioids, right? And he didn't have a great job because all the manufacturing jobs shipped overseas. Think of what George Floyd's life would have been if we had a manufacturing base. He would be a supervisor or a foreman at a factory or a junior management. He'd be opening up his summer home to go fishing up in the lake country in Minnesota, with his second home up there, a little cabin he could share. If he didn't have the opioids that shipped in by the Chinese Communist Party through the cartels in Mexico across open borders, with everybody making money on the way up and the huge profits in that, to poison him and no opportunity for a job. And to top it all off, the Chinese Communist Party virus that the elites and the scientific priesthood has basically helped fund and helped do. He had the CCP COVID-19 virus in him. He had the virus in him. He had fentanyl in him. He didn't have access to a great job because all the great manufacturing jobs are shipped off. Look, that's the Greek tragedy to me of George Floyd, is that he was in that position that day. And by the way, let's talk about the fake 20. Well, that's also the CCP, and we know that these foreign entities are putting out this fake money all the time with the opioids to do it. That was what the counterfeit bill was. Every aspect of his life driven by geopolitics that led to that.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.